On December 31st, 1941, the Antitrust Division of the Department of Justice filed an action against NBC and CBS, seeking to break up the network's methods of operation. This action was separate from the FCC findings. At this point in time, the FCC had no actual jurisdiction to rule over the radio industry. The Department of Justice, on the other hand, most certainly did. On January 8, 1942, NBC officially formed a separate corporate entity for the Blue Network. NBC Red at this point became known as simply NBC. The Blue Network was put up for sale with an asking price of $12 million. 2 days later, Mutual Broadcasting filed a $10.275 million lawsuit against NBC and its parent company RCA, alleging a conspiracy to hinder and restrict Mutual from freely and fairly competing in the transmission and commerce of nationwide network programs. While the fierce competition and animosity remained amongst the three networks, the United States' entry into World War II changed the priorities of the U.S. government and public sentiment. Any major company could have become the owner of the Blue Network. As a separate entity, it was the number 3 U.S. radio chain. Interested buyers included 7 Wall Street investment houses, 3 insurance companies, 2 commodity manufacturers, a daily newspaper, and a retired capitalist. They'd all come and go, frightened by economic uncertainty and the future of radio broadcasting. In June of 1942, the United States Supreme Court upheld the jurisdiction of the FCC. While the litigation continued in the wake of this ruling, the public and private antitrust litigation was suspended. By December, RCA proudly announced that the Blue Network had ended the year in the black. Despite obstacles, observers gave the Blue a fair chance of finding a buyer in 1943. They pointed to the $11,300,000 worth of gross time the network sold to advertisers during 1942, and the fact that the network had added 30 affiliated stations, ending the year with 146. 20% of the airtime was now sponsored, with 40 such programs, and 24 of them being new accounts. At this point in time, advertising agencies were largely responsible for sponsored programs. Clients with products to sell had the agencies on retainer. They'd put programs together and buy time from the network. On NBC and CBS, programs were always live, as Orson Welles explains.
Network shows had to be live by law. The only transcribed shows were syndicated shows and local ones.
The Blue Network leaned heavily on war and children's programs, built up a first-rate staff of newscasters and commentators, especially the one show that they brought with them from NBC Red, the Jurgens Journal, with Walter Winchell.
Now the editorial room of the Jurgens Journal and Walter Winchell. Good evening, Mr. North of South America, and by shortwave overseas, let's go to Germany, flash. We must take the good news with the bad. 1. Admiral Nimitz has just announced that Japanese suicide planes have heavily damaged an American hospital ship. The Mercy ship, when attacked, was evacuating wounded from bloody Okinawa. 29 men aboard were killed. 33 others were wounded. The American hospital ship was the USS Comfort. Stockholm. Unconfirmed dispatches say that Hitler died at noon today in his underground Berlin headquarters, and at his bedside was Joseph Goebbels, rat number 2.
By January of 1943, as Time magazine reported, the Blue Network was giving advertisers special discounts, charming them with other commercial wrinkles, and violating NBC and CBS's ban on transcribed programs. Transcription discs had been something that local stations and the Mutual Broadcasting System had employed for years. Here in the U.S., the Blue Network's 41-year-old president, Mark Woods, felt that war workers and others who couldn't listen to live shows in the evenings should be given a chance to hear them transcribed. It was a foretelling of things to come.
Meets the gold of the day. Someone waits for me. Back from a well-earned vacation, Bing AWOL Crosby.
In January of 1943, the FCC approved the sale of the Yankee Network, part of Mutual, to the Ohio-based General Tire and Rubber Company. The network had Boston's WNAC, 3 other owned and operated stations, and contracts with 17 additional affiliates. That's significant because it was the first time that the FCC approved the sale of any regional broadcasting chain of this magnitude. On May 10, 1943, the Supreme Court upheld the right of the FCC to regulate practically everything that was radio. NBC's hand was being forced. It had to take action and dump the secondary Blue Network. On July 30, 1943, just over 2 months after the court's ruling, RCA announced the sale of the network to American Broadcasting System Incorporated, a firm controlled by Edward J. Noble, a former Undersecretary of Commerce, who was better known as the chairman of Lifesavers. The price was announced at $8 million. On October 3, 1943, Noble released a letter to the FCC in which he stated that the Blue Network would meet with an open mind of all requests for broadcasting time. 9 days later, the FCC approved the sale, and Edward Noble bought NBC's Blue Network from General David Saroff for $8 million. This led to Mutual dropping its lawsuit. Unfortunately for them, the transfer of the NBC Blue Network to new ownership did little to help Mutual's competitive position. The next week, on October 11th, and then on October 17th, the Justice Department dropped the antitrust proceedings against CBS and NBC, and the federal courts, upon its motion, dismissed Mutual's antitrust claims against the 2 networks. An early step was to obtain a deep-pocketed backer. On December 28, 1943, Noble sold a 12.5% stake to Time Inc., and a similar stake to advertising executive Chester LaRoche for $500,000 each. For the first 2 years of ownership, the network was simply known as the Blue Network, before officially changing its name to the American Broadcasting Company in 1945.